All right. Well, welcome, folks, to Winter's Inn of Church. It's connected closely with In Church, which Brent and I both are elders, and it's a real privilege to be able to spend this time with Brent. And we'll cover a variety of topics. So, good morning, Brent. How are you?
Good morning, and the feeling's mutual, of course. I'm elated that I don't have to just talk by myself. This is more enjoyable. But what do you got on your mind today?
Well, we're in a crazy election cycle again. Probably not very many people get election postcards by the box full every day in the mail, but I have been. But a question that I've been wondering about is, how does our system of government and how should we as Christians and churches and pastors, how should we view that differently from like how Paul, he was in the Roman system, Hitler, that was another dictatorship, and all through history, versus what we have in our form of government, and what is our responsibility and duty, and how are we to be good stewards with what we have versus the other fellows that I mentioned.
Well, government is God's business, and it is his primary business. That is why, of course, in the gospel records, the message was the kingdom of God, the kingdom from the skies, the kingdom of heaven, is coming. But when you read the gospel records, you see also not only is it spoken of as the future, it's spoken of as the present. The kingdom is coming, and the kingdom is here. Both of those statements are there. The question then becomes, what is the kingdom? And I like to use the analogy that the Dutchman, the prime minister of the Netherlands back 120 years ago, pretty near, used to describe God's government. God's government is a arrangement of delegated authority. God's arrangement of delegated, to use his term, Abraham Kuyper, delegated spheres of authority. And we all have them. But to see the kingdom of God, which is God's government, is to be able to see those arrangements of delegated spheres of authority that all of us have to varying degrees for certain subjects or certain places, even maybe if we're just a young child, over some of the responsibilities our parents have delegated to us. That's government, and it's local. Well, you say, what about the government in Washington, D.C., or the government in the State House of my state? Well, that's more government delegated. All authority is delegated from the lawgiver, Romans chapter 13, verse 1, and that authority then is redelegated sometimes, depending upon the circumstances. And of course, in America, the militia of each one of our states has gotten together, as it were, as our Constitution of the United States says, right in the preamble, the people, that's the militia. And having received delegated authority from God himself, they delegated authority through that document, our U.S. Constitution, through the state constitution's documents, to establish government. That's authority that the people, the militia of the several states, have delegated to state and the federal government, the general government in Washington, D.C. Well, what is the difference here? Well, the difference is, for example, Paul the Apostle, which you mentioned a minute ago, Paul the Apostle lived in a Babylonian system called Romanism, Rome. And that system of government, that kind of government, is the government of almost every country in the world today. Almost every country is under some form of the code of the Roman Empire, particularly the code compiled under the direction of Emperor Justinian, called the Justinian Code. There's the French form of the code, Code Napoleon, it's called today. The German form of the code, called Code of Bismarck, and the canon laws of the Church of Rome is another form put to ecclesiastic purpose. And that code of Justinian separates us from all the rest of the world. We are not a law of the city, civil law, Code of Justinian country. We know nothing about the Code of Justinian in the English-speaking world, so much so we've never even had it translated into English. That's how much we know about it or care. There was, by the way, son of a German immigrant, Dan, who became Supreme Court Justice, one of the Supreme Court Justices of Wyoming, who tried to translate that code into English. And he didn't know it's written originally in Greek. And he didn't know diddly squat from straight up about Greek, but he determined, he was an ambitious fella, to try to translate it. He didn't know the different aspects of the Greek verb. He saw a verb, he just translated any way he thought fit. And that particular so-called translation has never been published or anybody would read it because it's not accurate. But we don't care in America about the laws of the rest of the world because they're laws of tyranny. Paul the Apostle lived in that world, and here's the distinction that we must draw, in my humble studied opinion, for what it's worth, Dan. All governments are fundamentally theocracies. All governments are theocracies. Theo is the word in the Greek New Testament. Theos means God or lawgiver, final decider of right and wrong in individual instances from whose decision there is no appeal. All the world makes the government, the state, under that code, makes the state the final arbiter, the lawgiver, the God, from whose decision there is no appeal. Whether it be the government of Bismarck's Germany in World War I, the government of Hitler's Germany in World War II, the government of Japan under the form of that Code of Bismarck, the German Code in World War II, the government of France during the French Revolution or thereafter, all of that, different forms of the Roman Code of Justinian, which makes the government the final arbiter, God. As Hegel, the German said, the German philosopher Hegel, he said, the state, the government, is God walking on earth. Well, what does Rome say? Rome says the Pope has all the authority of Jesus Christ walking on earth. What did the Japanese say? They said the Emperor of Japan is descended from the heavenly body we call the sun, 142 generations before. He is God walking on earth. What did the Egyptians say? They said the Pharaoh of Egypt is God walking on earth. What did the first emperor of the world, Nimrod, what did he say, and his mother, Semiramis, say about him? He is God walking on earth, by the way, born Pharaoh, the emperor of Japan. Nimrod conceived, they said, of a sunbeam from the sky that impregnated their mother's womb. You getting the picture here? That is the counterfeiting of the virgin birth of Jesus Christ. All of these are governments being God, and only in our common law tradition, that's the only option. It's either the law of the land, our common law tradition for government, or the law of the city, the Code of Justinian. Either government is God, or government is not God. And in both cases, they're theocracies, theocracy, power of a God. What God? Who are we going to recognize? There can't be government without a lawgiver, a God.
Yeah, our I can't remember which justice it was, but it was said that he said that you can't understand our Constitution unless you understand the common law. I think that's accurate.
Well, that was Supreme Court Justice William Howard Taft, Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. And he made the comment, that's been a number of years ago, but he's not the only one that said that. Justice Story would have said the same thing and said many things like that, and many others, and other judges besides the justices of the Supreme Court. They aren't the smartest folk in the world. We have no proof of that. They just had the political clout to get appointed. That's, but doesn't mean they're stupid either. They're just men. They were just men, just like us. And God made all men pretty smart in their own ways, every one of them. You too, by the way. I like to say, I'm not the dumbest guy in the world. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but neither am I the dumbest guy in the world. And so all of us are that way. And God gave us the responsibility to try to figure some of these things out and act on them. That's what God said. That's our responsibility under the only lawgiver, the true lawgiver, I should say. Well, the only lawgiver in sky and on land. He's the only one. Now, there are lawgivers he's appointed down here on earth, but that's not in the skies. To be a final arbiter, which is a decider of a question in government, that you don't have to give your reasons for the decision. And down here in our common law tradition, the only other tradition, our law of the land, is the only other tradition available besides the law of the city in its various forms. But down here, the jury, the 12-man jury, is the final decider of right and wrong. And our Constitution of the United States says as much in Amendment 7. Yeah, that was William Howard Taft. Thanks for bringing that up, Dan.
Yeah. Another thing that comes to mind is in the Declaration, we pledged allegiance to God, and then therefore they, through the common law influence, if I'm saying this wrong, correct me, but through the common law influence, we have our system of government. If we can keep it, I guess was one comment long ago.
It was. Let me interject something here, Dan, if I may, just so folks listening. It's not up to you to do this. I'm the only one that can really do it properly. And I want folk to know, as you had said before, we're both elders. We're the two elders at In Church. In Church is not a big church. Well, it may be bigger than I think it is. I don't know. We're on the internet a lot, and folk claim that this is where they go to church. But Dan is a former state legislator. And so when I talked to him about doing these presentations, I know Dan, known him for a number of years, I recognize that he has a feel for government, having participated in it in an intense way. And that's why him asking these questions, he's not just shooting from the hip. He has ideas about government from his experiences and from his life as a Christian man. But that point you made about if we can keep it, that is attributed to Benjamin Franklin. I think from what I can read, that on pretty good evidence, he probably did say that. Is it true that we have a republic, that he came out of the Constitutional Convention, the story goes, and some lady on the street asked him, "What did you give us, Mr. Franklin?" And he said, "A republic, if you can keep it." Well, nice sentiment. Did he really say it? I'm not dead sure. If he did say it, was it right? No, it's not really true. Not precisely true, no. Could have been Franklin said it and anyway and made a mistake, and even though it's not precisely true in my studied opinion, yeah, he could have said it. Let me say this about that, if I may. I want to distinguish, Dan, between a democracy. No, I want to show that you can't distinguish between a democracy and a republic. You can't distinguish between a democracy and a republic. The battle, of course, as Daniel Webster recognized back in the 1820s. He wasn't stupid. He figured it out. The fundamental battle, he takes this right out of the Bible, by the way. Right out of the Bible. Right out of the first chapters of Genesis. The fundamental battle is the battle for the dictionary of our English tongue in America and in other countries for the dictionary of their tongue. Because the devil, the Satan himself, Old Scratch, the Satan, when I say the Satan, I mean the Satan, the great accuser, the great fiendish adversary, chief tool of warfare is to pervert the definitions of words. And them that don't pay attention to the definition of words lose their lives, their liberties, and their property. I didn't say that. He who never quotes, Dan, you've heard me say, he who never quotes is never quoted. That's a quote from somebody smarter than me, but I can't remember his name. It doesn't make a lot of difference, but I do want to give credit. I only know what I read and what I see. Used to say, like Will Rogers, only know what I read in the newspapers. Well, today we can say fundamentally the same thing. I only know what I read on the internet here or experience, and I'll give you my testimony. But the battle is for definitions of words, and Dan Webster, or Noah, rather, I said Dan. I didn't mean to say Dan. I'll correct myself. Noah Webster. Dan Webster was senator from New Hampshire. Noah Webster saw that was a problem, and he published a dictionary in 1828, and his intention in publishing that dictionary was to establish an American English tongue, a tongue of whose definition of its words were the definitions out of the Bible itself, our translations, our foremost translations of the Bible. And he said, if we understand words the way God understands them, and he did his own translation of the Bible, by the way, called the Webster Translation. I have a copy of it here. It never got much traction, but he said that was his greatest work, his translation of the Bible. He knew that's the most important one. And he understood what the words of the Bible meant. He had put the time in to understand them, translating from the original tongues. And he tried to establish that. So our battle is over definition of words. For example, what is government? What is a lawgiver? What is right and wrong? What is a woman? What is a man? We had Dan, you remember this, an appointee to the Supreme Court, wasn't it? And the congressman asked, what is a woman? And the potential appointee said, I don't know, I'm not a biologist. Well, Dan, but I got to thinking, Dan, if somebody asked me what a woman was, what would I say? Well, I'd start by thinking, well, what does the Bible say a woman is? Let's start by saying, what does the word woman mean in our English tongue? Well, we start with that. I am not a biologist, but I'm not a chicken either, Dan. But I know a good omelet when I eat it, and I'm not a cow, and I know good milk when I drink it. And I'm not a woman, and I'm not a biologist, but I think I can say with all confidence and authority, on the authority of God himself, what a woman is. We can start with our own tongue, woman. What does that word mean? Well, it's a contraction of the Anglo-Saxon word, womb. Womb. And the word woman, womb and man, contracted together in our Anglo-Saxon. And the woman is the man, mankind. Woman is mankind who has a womb. I don't have a womb. I'm not a woman. My mother had a womb. Bless her. And that's how she gave me birth. She's a woman. I'm not. But I can know what a woman is and the definitions that our government is giving now. Dan, have you filled out an application from the government lately, or some kind of a form from the government, and it asks you what sex you are? Have you done that in recent years?
Yeah, and it really bothers me too.
Yeah. Just to be a lawyer, you got to fill out stuff every so often, continuing education stuff, and they'll ask you, are you a man, a woman, or other?
Or
what? Pardon?
Well, there's a bigger list than that even on some of them.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, that's mild. That's really being kind of reserved about it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we can do a cliffhanger. And if you want to hear about ecclesiocracy versus theocracy, join us on the next clip. This is Mr. Dan Scadam and Montana Dan, I call him. He's the other elder here at Inn Church, Winters Inn, connected to Winters Inn. We just call it Inn Church, INN, And this is A Common Lawyer Comments. Join us on the next clip.